I'm going to talk a little bit about unexpected art. I point at this screen, but it's actually probably more appropriate to point at this one. I just started to think about the definition of art, and it's definitely a bottle of wine conversation, not so much a kind of one-way conversation. But to frame it up a little bit, and I respect the term too. When I think about art, I think it's reserved for a few, and so this is maybe an aspirational title more than it is of anything else, I guess. But what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is how we're weaving artistic thinking into our work as a small studio, and a little bit about that. Our focus largely is, and when I say our, it's just a studio of 10 people, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but our focus is kind of being adjacent to architecture and being next to their deep practice. So it's really important for us to be around deep practice people. Some people have probably heard, I'm sure there are plenty of architects in the room that understand the idea, and I've heard this notion before that you don't become a great architect until you're 50 because there's so many things to learn. So we're able to be kind of the right hook, we've referred to ourselves as, also the junk drawer we get referred to as. And right now, we work in these areas. These are kind of our areas of focus. And for a 10-person group, it's, I think, pretty robust in terms of what we offer. And we're exploring a lot of different areas. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the team that it takes to pull off a well-rounded group like this so that we can be really useful for architects and really kind of push what that definition of architecture is. And if you're doing the math, which I wouldn't be doing because I'm not good at it, you've realized that I said 10 people. Oops, sorry. I'm writing 10 people, but there's also a number of other practices mentioned there, including our, and I sincerely mean unfortunate, studio manager, because it's basically a ridiculous job of wrangling all these ridiculous people. No, we've done a really good job, and I'm super, super proud of my team. We work with about 900 architects in a firm called NBBJ. I had a small studio before that had kind of 3 or 4 people kind of on and off for the kind of 5 years before they snapped me up and roped me into the large architecture machine. We also consult for all sorts of different architecture firms all over the world, design firms all over the world. So they allow us our freedom to do that, which is really, we're grateful for that too. So we're able to go out and learn from even sometimes their competition and bring that back. And there's a lot of kind of co-opetition, I think I've heard the term before. So when I look at the breadth of talent and who we hire and bring in, one of the hardest things is getting a group of people to work together that doesn't speak the same language. So how does a sociologist relate to a spatial designer who relates to a brand strategist who relates to an urban designer? There's a lot of unique vernacular and things that happen in each one of those silos. And you kind of see that come out through some of our work. And so when I brought the studio into NBBJ, one of the first things they said, yeah, we're really we're kind of founded on this T-shaped people. It's a David Kelly idea that a lot of you probably know about, which is the idea of a core practice being deep. So something like architecture, something like interior design. But then we want some breadth to that as well. And we said, that's good, but we think it could be a little more evolved. And so springboarding on the awesome work that David Kelly did, we start to talk about pie-shaped people. And first of all, I kind of like the comparison of the letter form. It's just kind of more fun. So maybe we just hacked it into making it work for us. But a lot of the people in the studio, and that's why the number 10 is actually kind of misrepresenting our talent. A lot of us have a couple of practices or are more horizontal than we are deep. And then we just pair up with deep practices. So a lot of a good example is someone we hired about a year and a half ago. She's a former student of mine. She studied architecture and music at Berkeley, did a dual major at the same time, which is crazy to me. I don't even understand how people do that stuff. And just super, super cool. But then she's also into all sorts of other things. So when I look at, again, the comparison between the rigidity of this and the fluidity of that, I think it's really interesting to think about someone who can really just kind of go with the flow. She's into the maker space. So if you threw an Arduino at her, she'd know exactly what to do. She lights up when you talk about app design. She's currently working on a project that combines her background in sound and music, and sort of an initiative we started a few years ago. And now we're really happy to have her because we can have a full-time musician working on sound installations. So she's literally, I think, as we speak, up in our little sound studio in Seattle, cranking out music for Amazon's first ground-up building, which is kind of exciting. So this is a good example, and everyone in the studio really has this kind of approach and this kind of breadth of talent. So just to get into a little bit of what the work looks like, this is a project for Seattle City Light. They're the nation's greenest utility, so we're really excited to be working with them. What we're doing in this case is partnering with the architecture team. We started early on. We get involved heavily in understanding what constituents are going to be involved in the project. So that goes for the immediate neighborhood, out-of-town visitors, Seattle City Light as an organization, and then kind of ourselves and how do we gratify that. And so we start to explore that with the architecture team. The architecture team runs with that, and this is a pretty good example, actually, of them running in terms of formalism, and they just made this beautiful building for us to work with. We're super excited about just the form of the building itself and how it sits in the city and how it patches two neighborhoods together. But specifically, we kind of get involved after the shell and core is baked, and we're looking at those two little bright spots of video. And I'm actually, it's cool because my dad's here today, and I get to work with him on this stuff. But he's helping me work through some of the video, the technical side of the video things, and the installation of those and specification of them, which is super exciting. And yeah, thank you. And so we're doing a number of things on this site, and I'll kind of burn through them real quick. This is just the mood board that we just pitched to the city of Seattle. The arts and culture had to review our work in order to do LED screens. So we made this short film and this beautiful mood board, I think beautiful. And arts and culture was like, yep, check, it is art, will allow video screens in the city. So that actually took a long time and a lot of effort, but they're really excited about having this as an asset to the neighborhood. Just to kind of keep going and thinking about it as kind of from an urban point of view, we're really looking at connecting this block and making it a very engaging block. A lot of people walk from Capitol Hill down to the Amazon campus and will walk right past this. So these kind of sculptural things that you're seeing up there that are kind of glowing are actually an interactive game with these made of these glass sculptures that have capacitive touch panels on them. So you can like run around and play with them, and kind of there's a game that's kind of embedded in it that we hope that people start to play, especially when student groups come through and start to learn about the site. There's also a Future of Power exhibit that's going to be going on below. There's an immersive alley. We wanted to activate the alley and bring some sound and light into it so that it was kind of uninhabitable in a sense, but also pleasurable to walk through. So just kind of a fun, refer to our work as spikes along the journey of a day sometimes, and we think this is going to be one of those. Kind of moving into the space a little bit, we really love working at different scales. So we have product designers and urban designers, and it's really fun to think about every kind of point along the way and being able to help a project along at every scale. So I wanted to show you a little bit of the kind of more tactile side of things, and looking at this kind of I don't know what you'd call it, kind of blob of a wall there. It's actually an immersive theater you walk through on the right-hand side, and it opens up into a theater space. And we started to look at, working with the interior designer, started to look at what the materiality could be, and we're always pushing for alternative architectural materials, and how I don't know how true that is, but this is MDF. It's not that unusual. But maybe what is unusual about it is it's 3D routed, which is kind of a fun new process to have access to. And we actually have been taking data to inform some of our patterns and some of our materials. So this actually pulls GIS data and reiterates it as this kind of textural panel. So these textural panels will make that wall. And then we kind of moved into like, okay, so how do we start to look at the graphics that are applied to it and the color? So you've got this kind of water texture, back here. That kind of is a little bit of a suggestion of the fact that Seattle City Light gets about 96% of its energy from water. And then moving into this is actually, this represents each little line that you're seeing represents one household out of 408,000 ratepayers. So they gave us all the kind of scraped clean data from that. So we just get these spreadsheets that say house A uses this much energy, house B, I guess house 1, because 408 isn't going to work with alpha, is it? So we ended up getting that data, and we ran it through a program called processing, and churned out this really beautiful pattern, I think beautiful pattern. And it's fun to think about people going, hey, like, your house is in here somewhere. How are you spending your energy? So when people come through and kind of visit the exhibit, they'll be able to say, like, you're in there. The docent will be able to say, you're in there somewhere, and start to just raise a little bit of cognizance. So it's material with a story, which is kind of interesting to us. And we're doing a lot of these projects. So this is for Samsung's headquarters. They just asked us to do a facade And there's all this embedded information in these facades that aren't explicit really at all, but we think it's important to drag some of that information forward. Sometimes it looks more, a little more didactic or more informational, and it's more legible. This is for Russell Investments. We did a number of these installations where these actually are these like beautiful little blades of grass that move back and forth, and it's all informed by their stock portfolio their portfolio performances. And when we get one that's really crazy, it shoots off with these little spikes, and so you can walk off the elevator in the morning, and you can say like, hey, this is what's doing well, this is what's performing well, and it's just kind of a good way to start the day and kind of add a little energy. That's definitely the backwards button. And this is one that I'm really excited about. This is something we've been working on for a couple of years, and we just poured concrete on. It's for Amazon. It's an alternative workspace. So as much as it looks like somewhere you just go hang out, it has all these plants and waterfalls and all these interesting things going on with it. But it's really just fun to start to look at an alternative workspace. So that's kind of the work we're doing. But I wanted to talk about kind of how we got there, and if it looks like interesting work to you, hopefully this is an interesting presentation to you. So it started like 5 years ago, where I started to do stuff that had less of a kind of a business direction to it. It wasn't like, so methodically thought out. I started to do stuff just for fun and kind of think of topics that I thought were socially interesting or just maybe even just simply creative. And this is kind of in my mind, the quintessential project for starting that kind of mentality. And it's basically all I started doing is taking photographs. Every time I got in a taxi, I'd take the same photograph. I have about 1,000 of these. It was in 5 years ago when you started to get the idea that taxis aren't going to be around for forever. My kids probably won't. It'll be a relic. It'll be in movies, I imagine. They'll watch old movies and go, what is that yellow car, and why did you just get into it? We've seen Uber take over Seattle, and it's pretty interesting to go to places like I was in Seoul and Vietnam or Ho Chi Minh City, and they all have Uber, and it's weird. And so I was like, yeah, my intuition paid off. So I have a ton of these photos, and it was one of the first explorations of just kind of weird stuff that started to make, it really made no sense, but it was awfully fun, and it felt creative, and it ends up sometimes having beautiful results. So our studio's been doing lots of that stuff lately. This is an example of, we just spent a few weeks, this a couple of years ago, spent a few weeks in Bois Boucher, which is a little, it's started by Vitra, a design company, and Centre Pompidou in Paris, and they have this farm, and it's absolutely beautiful. And we just went out there for a few weeks to explore the idea of experience design and how you perceive a place over time. And so we did all sorts of explorations. This is us just navigating a space through other senses other than sight. This is just a few months ago in Vietnam with a part of the architecture team. A few of us tagged along, just went through Vietnam and just explored and came back. We were really interested in the fact that Vietnam has grown insanely fast and they have zero infrastructure to facilitate that. So we spent a few days or a week in the Mekong Delta and in Ho Chi Minh City just looking at what kind of urbanism could do for them, or what we can learn from them and they can learn from us. Just kind of interesting stuff. We paint a lot lately. We never have done that. The architecture team thinks we're crazy. But we have a dedicated space for doing kind of dirty work. So we have our very polished office, and then we have our very go make some sound installations, go cause some trouble. So we're doing a lot of that lately. We're seeing this is a day at the office, and we're seeing more of that kind of play. This is capacitive touch paint that April's working on, and she's painting this paper crane in capacitive touch paint so that when you touch it, it makes a sound, which is kind of cool. And it's just a graphic. It just looks like black paint, which is really neat. She'll do all the programming and stuff like that and generate the sound. So again, those multiple disciplines coming into play. And then we're starting to look at kind of the social side of things too. It's really trendy right now to create a movement. I feel like every millennial right now is starting some kind of movement. So we thought, why not? We're getting a little old to do the movement thing, but that's all right. And so this is something I started called Not Art. My wife and I got married about a little over a year ago, and we just decided to go to Paris and spend 3 months just messing with the city. This was one of the first things that we did. So it's basically a way of publicly voting on art, right? Or what some people call art, and I would just disagree. But we're kind. We also have art stickers, so it's not entirely. We're not total jerks. It's good. My wife insisted on that, actually. I was just going to do this everywhere, and she's like, no, how about once in a while? Could we do that? Could we do that? And we do have one in North Korea, which we're really excited about. That was part of a trip that we took, that our studio took with the architecture team again, that same group that you saw before. So I did get one in North Korea. I didn't have the guts to actually stick it on the wall, so I just kind of did that. Yeah. And this is what I'm going to talk a little bit about in my workshop tomorrow. So I don't want to get too far into it, but this is a project. We also do a bit of graffiti around Seattle, which is a felony, apparently. I found out recently. But we do it for good. It's a good thing. We always try to make sure it's beautiful and it has a kind of a bigger vision in mind. This is the first, as I know, it's the first augmented reality sculpture program to take over a city. So we painted that paper crane everywhere, the one you saw April working on earlier, and it's actually a augmented reality marker, and painted this paper crane all over the place. We're still doing it. And then we're going to reveal that it's an augmented reality marker, so you'll be able to hold your phone up to it. And we just finished the app, so it's super exciting, and I can show you it. But you hold the phone up to it, and this paper crane appears in 3 dimensions, and you can kind of walk around with it. It's kind of cool. And that's actually, like, clients are highly interested in this, so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about in my workshop tomorrow. So this is just the start of play. Things that we weren't sure that were going to pay off, really. Even the people that we were hiring, it was kind of a risk. Especially like 2 years ago, we started to really kind of double down on the idea that there are these folks out there that don't really have a home and they don't really have a career, so to speak. They have some education and they don't really. I was actually talking to someone backstage about, like, I don't know how I even describe my job. I'm like, I can relate to that because it looks like that a lot, and you're like, I don't even know what we're doing here. So I want to jump in a little bit to, like, how do you get there? If this is interesting, if it looks like interesting work, I think there's some pretty fun little rules to follow, and this is actually something I've been doing since high school, which is, it's really funny to dust those off and see how dumb I was. I'm looking forward to looking at how dumb I was when I did this stuff too, when I'm 80 or something. But a lot of what I've been really focused on just personally is taking an audit of the things, kind of my spheres of influence, or the things I'm interested, or what are my junk drawer, so to speak, and how do I get those jammed into my day job. So it's been, like, really, I've been highly focused on that. And it's important to know it doesn't need to be things you're interested in. It could be places. It could be anything. So you just need to decide what you want to bring into your daily life. And I think it's just kind of an interesting way of diagramming it. It also doesn't need to be 80 things. I have a kind of a problem with maybe too many things, as you might have noticed from that previous diagram. It can be something as simple as kids and art in your day job. I love the idea of I want to be a part-time stay-at-home dad, and I want to teach art classes, and I want my kids to be part of that. Well, it doesn't have to be this big convoluted thing. It can be really simple. But we'll use me for an example because I have the microphone. So we'll go back to this. One thing I noticed is I needed explicit ties to what the types of things I was doing. I needed explicit ties to my day job. So as part of that, I realized that I needed to do kind of one of two things. I needed to either reach out to people who were super good in the areas that I was interested in and kind of ride their coattails and support them and drag them into the business that I was doing every day. I think the best example is maybe MIT and Experience Institute. We have formal kind of relationships with both of them. A guy reached out to me 3 years ago, and he was like, hey, I'm starting this school. I'm thinking about starting this school. I made up my MBA. I'm actually just going around and hanging out with artists and designers and entrepreneurs over the next year. And I was wondering if I could come live with you for a month or come work with you for a month. I was like, you know what? You sound interesting. Come live with me for a month and let's hang out. He's now a Forbes 30 under 30 in education. He's sponsored by Stanford D School. He consults for all sorts of crazy, awesome people. And we've got an awesome board. If you're a graphic designer, Sagmeister is on our board. We've got David Kelly from IDEO, who's just an amazing guy. He founded Stanford D School too. So that's my little way of getting a little hooks into education. And I think I have my either equivalent partner or on the other side, I'm just learning a lot. So get really legit partners. If you write one thing down, I'd say this is probably it. So it's going to end it's a big quick fall off. Then I'm just going to flip through blank slides the rest of the time. So super legit partners. I think finding those people who it's almost like a venture capitalist mindset. Like who's about to blow up? Who's doing something that's really interesting? Who's on the bleeding edge of something cool? And then saying, how can you help them? You know, what can you do for them? So in Victor's case, the guy I was mentioning before, the interesting thing is April, who I was showing you before, telling you about architecture and music background. I met her through Experience Institute, so it's really fun to see this loop close. Now I work 3 feet away from her. It's awesome. So it's closing those loops with people that are doing interesting things. And then when you can't do that, and I think this is kind of reserved for the things you're most passionate about, just dive into them. So if it's something that you're kind of interested in, but you kind of are armchairing it, really get a little more invested in learning. So there's someone that I really love. We have a bunch of kind of like family heroes, like Julia Childs and all sorts of weird people. One of them is Philip Glass, and we saw him. My wife and I saw him speak 6 months ago or so. And this is this is a quote from his book, but he basically talked the entire time about this. And I love that this one quote captures those 2 thoughts that I was just mentioning. So apart from jazz and experimental art music, it was largely the art world that gave us permission to change the rules by which we worked. So again, like people like Victor in education, he just let us totally change the way we work. So we've got a terrible habit, and I think we should have disciplinary partners and friends, and we should be hanging out with people that we are alike with, but I also think we get much more interesting results, and it's a much more difficult thing to do, but we get much more interesting results when we hang out with people that are outside of our practice. So Philip Glass did a good job. He's a composer and has Emmys, like 80 of them or something. And so kind of the other half of it, again, is the difficulty that was at the moment I simply didn't have the technical musical skills to make the work that I wanted to make. So he's really talking about, and I love that he says as soon as possible because there's a lot of urgency there, but he quickly realized, like, this music is going to be my thing, and I need to really hammer down. I can't generate that firsthand. So it is a little bit of the, if you want it done right, you got to do it yourself mentality, and it's kind of the counterpart to having awesome partners, especially if you want to do a lot of stuff. So again, good partners, preferably in the art world or really ridiculous end of things, and then learning a lot. And slowly over time, you just sort of see yourself kind of closing that. And the coolest thing about it is you just don't have time to do the stuff you don't want to do. And it's kind of a weird happenstance. And you find yourself waking up having to kind of jump from, like a lot of my week looks like jumping from, health and wellness, working with our healthcare team, which we have the largest healthcare practice in the world in the firm that we're sitting in. Things like film, where we're working with some crazy directors right now, fairly well-known people. In the day or a week looks a lot like jumping from bucket to bucket, and then you're like, oh, that was a good week, and you're kind of done. And you're exhausted. And then you find, what are your new things, or do you want to just focus on that? And then if you're designing this presentation, you realize you've just designed the Japanese flag. And if you're a graphic designer and you're from Japan, this Japanese flag probably looks a lot like this American flag. Because it's not exactly proportionally correct and the colors are a little off, but whatever. Anyway. I think that the first, as I was kind of going through this stuff, the easy thing to gloss over is what are your spheres of influence? And that's kind of a businessy term for my taste, but spheres of influence is definitely something that's gotten a little buzz and a little attention. I'm sure some of you even put a lens on this. And when you start to look at that, and if you're doing this on a regular basis, you know how hard it is to ask yourself these questions. I think these questions are really good questions, and I've made a habit of actually just asking myself a few of these every day. And they're not all thought out, there's probably 80 more if you really listed them, and you got to figure out what's right for you. But when you do leap out of bed and you kind of like jump out of bed and you're like ready to do something, pay attention to why that is. It's probably more than just you feel good that day. You probably have something going on. What do you get angry about? I think actually Victor, who I mentioned before, turned me on to this idea of like, what is like a travesty? What is absolutely unacceptable that you need to fix today? I thought that was a really cool attitude. Just who are you jealous of? of what topics really matter to you. What do you find that you're researching a bunch, but you don't ever get out of armchair mode? Those are just things to think about. And one of my favorite ones is like, what is your 80-year-old self gonna tell you? I thought that was really cool. I don't know who turned me on to that, but I've been paying attention to that one for a while. Probably Tony Robbins or something. Very Tony Robbins-y. I love that guy, banana hands. And the coolest thing about this, it's been, and it was a little risky. I don't know how else to say it. I wasn't completely convinced that spending a lot of time messing around in kind of weird areas was going to be a huge payoff. But I started to realize it just attracts super good work. So everyone just wants to like work with you, and they don't really even understand what you do. And we realized that. We're in an era, especially when the economy is good, so I'm curious to see when that wavers, how my career goes. But when the economy is good, I think it really is an amazing thing to see how people have adapted toward hey, look, you don't have to tell us what you do. You have to tell us what you're passionate about, what makes you tick, what problems you want to solve, but it doesn't have to be so explicit as it's usually made. Those pitches to businesses or organizations normally go, like, we'll deliver these three things. And it's really cool to see people kind of transist. I think as people's careers get shorter, people jumping around from company to company or working for themselves and jumping back to a company and having more of a fluidity than we probably ever had in human history. I think a lot of people are like, okay, I'm going to be here for 2 years. I'm going to do something cool with these people's money. And I'm totally serious about that. I think people are just sort of a little more attracted to or okay with getting fired even. It's not so threatening. It's not the end of the world to get fired, and I think it was a big deal, maybe 20 years ago or something. And so it's kind of cool to see, not even 20 years ago, like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I certainly fell into that category where there's a lot of fear about doing the right thing. So I could climb the ladder and stuff like that. And it's really fun to see people kind of transist out of that. So I showed you a lot of like kind of messing around stuff, just things we're playing with. But I want to show you a little more about how that artistic process is still changing the work. When I use artistic process, a lot of that's just messing around and having fun. So it's maybe a lofty title. And one thing we realized, or I think with one of the first kind of more like, we're going to jump into the film world a little bit, we hired a director of photography who is literally owned a company called Bootstrapper, which is a little nerve-wracking when you're doing a film installation that had a rather big budget. I mean, for us, big budget. But when it started to be, we were super stressed out, or I was super stressed out, losing a lot of sleep over this project, this film installation we were doing. And one thing that dawned on me is like, first of all, enjoy it. Like, it's going to happen or it's not, and it's not the end of the world if it doesn't. But and the other thing was like, this felt so different. It didn't feel like me sitting behind a desk drawing using kind of the traditional drawing tools. It felt a lot different. So we turned our upper floor into this weird little studio thing. We rented like literally $1 million worth of camera equipment, which we did not know how to use, and still don't. I think we employed butterflies, a dog, a frog, 2 goldfish. I feel like I'm missing an animal for this film, which is just like ridiculously weird to wrangle all those things, and especially with no experience. Our DP was really underexperienced. This was my living room for about a month. Was just people coming over, people painting stuff on walls. It was disruptive as can be, but it looked and felt different. This was like a Tuesday or something, so that was a good thing. The equipment looks different. So these are a lot of what we're doing lately is sound installations and playing with directional audio. We've got this huge, beautiful, for the geeks in the room, a huge, beautiful rack, which is not, that's a bad term. So there's this funny thing that happens as you start to see computer equipment, you see wires going everywhere, you see weird equipment like speakers like this, and it kind of feels different. Something's changing. Our software looks like this rather than Illustrator or Photoshop, which is kind of fun. And this is a sound installation, or driving a sound installation. And some of the sound work that we're doing and some of the pitches that we take to clients, it's like, how do you get someone to spend $250,000 on a sound installation? It's really hard to do because we've never done it before. Not many people are out there doing it in the way we're approaching it. So we have to talk about a lot of things. We have to talk about like memory value and like what memory does to a person, in this case, a worker in an office. 5,000 people walk through this corridor, 5,500 every day. And it's an opportunity, and talking to the client about that opportunity and saying like, things like recency and primacy in memory are really valuable. The first and last interaction that you have, which is I'm just realizing this is your first interaction, so sorry, Ben, Design Conference. But recency and primacy matters, and you start to talk a little bit on those fronts, and we actually employ a brain scientist, a pretty well-known one too, and he walks us through this stuff. So again, we don't have to have him on staff. He's just around, and he has a ridiculously high hourly rate, but what we get for $400 an hour is just insane. We get little fun facts like that allow us to sell this work to clients. So again, building that partnership is really, really cool. So being able to talk through that and in a way that resonates with clients, and not being too afraid to take some of the raw creativity that seems like fun and turning it into a business tool. So this is a sound installation, or I'm sorry, this is a visual installation that was just it started as kind of a column that we had in the office that we tied to people's cell phones, and it would kind of change color, and it turned into this lamp that actually just sits in as a desk lamp, and it is owned by one person. This is my desk, and if I'm away from my desk, it turns off if I'm out of the building. As I walk into the building, it gets a little brighter so people know that I'm there, my team knows. And as I walk up to my desk, it turns bright white. So it's kind of just becomes my desk lamp. So it can also do things like when my wife text messages me, it turns pink. So that's adorable. Yeah, I think a big part of it is, and I kind of kicked off on this, and just to wrap up, there's this funny thing that happens in architecture specifically, and I think that every industry probably has its equivalent, especially if it's a deep practice industry, where you have these really badass people. Like we've got 900 architects at our fingertips that are all super legit, and just being in that world is really an honor for us, and we're really excited about that. We take some of the traditional tools as just a Rhino Grasshopper model, and we're taking a lot of those, the kind of the help that they give us, and turning it into helping them. And so we take those kind of headier things, those smarter things, and bounce that off the more playful things. This is actually a material board that we presented to a client, which it always is just funny to me, because none of these are architectural materials, and we're pitching an architectural installation, and actually kind of in a sense, a facade for a piece of architecture. And just as kind of a final example, this is where I think we end up. And this is just a mock-up, so that's why the photos are terrible, so I apologize, but it gives you the idea. And when we start to pair things like algorithmic design, like you saw on that previous slide, and bungee cord in this case, we start to get interesting stuff like just being able to ask the architecture team to clad a building with eye bolts, just the kind of these traditional, like you see up here, eye bolts. And then we're taking about 1.2 miles of bungee cord and weaving it through this entire building. So this is just a mock-up. We're trying to pick colors, which I'd love your take on. It's kind of the orange in the back and the red. So just as a kind of a final example of what happens when you bounce those deep practices off of that more playful spirit, and just a bit of a push to, no matter if you are in a deep practice, to pair with more playful people, or if you're a more playful person, to find those interesting people. So if you got more questions, I would love to meet you and say hello. But definitely shoot me an email with your thoughts, because I'm always looking for feedback on stuff like this. Anything you want to talk about. So I'm excited to be here. I'm so excited to have all you here for this first conference. Sorry for the long email address. You can blame my father for that. All right. I'm glad you're here. So yeah, please say hello, and really, I'm just super excited for you guys. Enjoy the conference. I'm looking forward to joining you as a participant and in the audience. So thank you very much.